Welcome to the Wild Precious Lives podcast. I'm Ginny McEnany and I am your host for today's episode. Today, in a very short time, we're going to meet the lovely Sally Hepworth, best-selling author of The Family Next Door, her most recent book, and several others. I think she's published 5 books. So she's got some incredible things to tell us about her journey and life as an author. But before we get into that, just a quick word from our sponsor. Our sponsor is Living the Change documentary, and that is a great documentary by 2 independent filmmakers, an Aussie and a Kiwi, and it's such a wonderful doco. And I think I said in the first podcast, I watched it with my daughter who's 12 for the first time, and she really got into it even though I didn't think she would. So it's basically about the global crisis that we're in with the environment and some people who are all living in New Zealand, random people just doing their bit to make a bit of a change in the world. And by seeing it, you get inspired to the different changes that you can do. Obviously not on some of the levels, some of them go really to the extreme, but it really gets you thinking. So if you are interested in that, you can download that to keep on Vimeo, and we've got a bit.ly link that you can do for that. So it's bit.ly/change WPL. So WPL for Wild Precious Lives. So that's bit.ly/change WPL. So let's get into this without further ado. I'd like to welcome, and I am face to face with this lovely guest tonight. So welcome, please, to the show, Sally Hepworth.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great to have you here. So Sally, I want to talk a bit about your journey through life as an author and as a person. So first of all, though, I want to know, best-selling author, how does one get that title? I was like brainstorming on my way here thinking, is it when you've hit the shelves at Target, you can say, hey, I'm a best-selling author? How do you get that title?
No, it comes from, you have to have hit a list. You have to be a bestseller in a certain category. So that could be a New York Times bestseller, meaning that you've hit that list. In Australia, they have got different publications that gets you on a list. And I have been a bestseller in different countries now, in the UK, in Australia, and in the US. So it means I've reached that number of sales on a list, basically.
Great. Okay. I'm impressed. So let's start off from when you were younger. So when you were little, primary school, did you love writing, drawing, telling stories, or did this come to you later in life?
I did, and it is something that I had always done. I wrote my first book when I was 7. Which was a book of short stories called Mustard and Ink, and I think that's such a good name, and I always think I might revisit that book, if only for the title. But and I was always writing, I was always telling stories verbally, and it's one of those things that now that I am a published author, everyone says, oh, you were always going to become a published author. You've always been telling stories. You've always been writing stories. But hindsight's really clear. For a long time, I didn't know what I wanted to do, because there's something about being a storyteller that doesn't really feel like a job. It's not like becoming a lawyer or a doctor where you know, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to university and study, and then I'll come out and apply for a job. It doesn't really work like that. I didn't know that it was going to be something that I could do. So I went and had another job, and I had several jobs. I worked in event management. I worked in human resources, and then I went on maternity leave with my first child, who's now 9, and I thought I'm going to give it a go, and I started to write. So yeah, that was how it happened for me. I always liked writing, and now I can look back and say that it was meant to be, but at the time, yeah, I'm not sure that I knew until I got there.
Yeah. And were you, say you hit high school, English, were you always an A grade student in English, or it was just randomly just happened as you went along?
I always liked English. I could get A's. Creative writing was what I loved. And that was the confusing thing, is because when English went to things like persuasive writing or things that I didn't find interesting, news reports and all those kind of things, no, I didn't do that well, and I wasn't interested in it. And when I got to year 12 and we were looking at courses, I was interested in journalism because I knew that I loved to write. But when I went along to RMIT, which was where one of the courses was, I remember sitting in my little desk, and the person who was taking the information session said, you have to read all the newspapers every day to be good at this course. And I thought, I don't read newspapers. I read Dolly or, whatever the magazines were then. I read Who Weekly and I read, Marie Claire. That's not the kind of writer that I want to be. And so I put that aside. I did an arts degree, which was the best thing that I did because it gave me a really good general education and understanding, and it honed my writing skills. I then went on that journey of event management, human resources, but whatever I was doing, I was turning my hand to writing. I was writing policies and procedures, and I was in event management. I was trying to write the manuals for things. It always just kept coming back to writing for me.
And did you, over that time, still use writing as a creative outlet for yourself?
Yes. I wasn't a huge journaler. I know that a lot of writers that I meet now are very into journaling, and that was the way that they found the love of writing, because I always felt like, and I still feel like, for me, writing is something I want to share. So I think when some people were journaling, some writers were journaling, I was telling stories. And right from the time I was really young, as you probably remember, when, I loved it. I would make up stories just so I could tell them. I loved delivering something that I thought was funny or emotional or, just a good story. And I loved having people gathered around me so I could tell them, I could make them laugh and entertain them. And so for me, rather than that personal kind of writing, it was always about sharing. So it was verbal stories, it was written stories that I knew were going to be shared, like speeches, or even just read by my teachers. I knew if it was a creative writing piece, a poem or a story of some description, I knew the teachers were going to read it. And I usually knew, in that way that you can say now when you're in your 30s, I knew I was quite good at it. I knew that if I really put my heart and soul into it, that it would be good, and that the teacher would give me that feedback. And that's a really cool thing when you're an insecure young person that isn't hugely talented in a lot of areas, to get that feedback that, you're good at this, and you kind of nurture that and foster that, and that becomes a little part of your self-esteem that you take with you.
Yeah. I heard, so Sally was in the same year and very good friends with my sister Maddie. I remember when I heard that you were writing and being published, I said, so do you remember Sally being a good writer at school? She said, I can't remember that, but I just remember she would tell the best stories and she'd have us all in fits, or she'd have us wanting to know what was going on. So, yeah, you really packed a punch with that. Oh, she was a great storyteller.
I love, that for me, it's always been about entertaining. I love to entertain people, and books do a lot of things, and writers have got a lot of motivations for why they want to tell stories, but first and foremost, for me, it's to entertain people. Yeah.
And was it hard to find your genre?
No, I didn't know. I didn't go in thinking I'm writing women's fiction. This is what I'm trying to do. I just, with the first book, started writing a story, and it happened to be women's fiction because that's what I read. That was what I was interested in. I am a woman. And so the story that came, it was from the voice of two women, that first book, going through relationships. And that's still, I write about relationships is the kind of common theme that comes through with all of my books. But genre has never really been something that I've given a lot of thought to. It's more, how do I tell this particular story that I want to tell? And it tends to be filled with women and women's issues, so it naturally just becomes women's fiction.
Comes on from there. And did you have any training or like formal training for writing novels, or was that just all yourself?
No, I was actually just talking about this at the Bayside Literary Festival last weekend. We were on a panel, there was 4 authors, and we were talking about, can writing be taught? And 2 of the authors had done PhDs in creative writing. One was completely untrained, and then I fit into the category, I sort of call myself self-trained because I never studied it. I did an arts degree, I did a postgraduate in human resources. About 5 years later, I started writing my first novel. I wrote it without any training, any study. I just used my knowledge of being a reader to naturally, and it's amazing what you will absorb just from being a reader, that natural arc of a story, or even from watching movies, or I speak to my son's grade 1 class about storytelling, and they understand it. There's an inherent understanding of story that we all have as humans. But once I finished that first book and I realized that I could actually finish a book, I became determined to write a better book and to get better at it, get faster at it, hopefully. And I went and read every possible book that I could find on how to write a novel. I read books about plot and structure, creating dynamic characters, cliffhangers. There is so many books out there. It's hard to find good ones, but I just fell into that world of writing and the craft and the study of it. And I probably still now, and that was 9 years ago when I was doing that, I read a writing craft book, as they're called, probably 2 or 3 times a year, just to, like anyone, like lawyers read books about, the up-to-date laws, and doctors, I imagine, read medical journals. I'm always trying to keep myself fresh and remind myself of what I'm trying to do.
And that's what I love about living in this time. I just don't think you have to go to university and study to do a lot of things. There's so much that can be learned on the job, and then there's YouTube, there's books, there's so much. And if you're a passionate learner and want to keep improving your skills, I think you can do that. And if you've got that inherent skill to begin with, if uni isn't for you, I think there's so many other options out there these days.
I absolutely agree. In fact, when I decided to sit down and write a book, having not done any training at all, I opened my Google browser, and this is 9 years ago, and I typed in how to write a novel. This is true. And Google came up with lots of different techniques, and I picked one, and I'm not going to tell you what it is because I don't remember what it was or if it was any good, but just finding that gave me the confidence to say, well, this is how you do it, and now I can do it. I can go forth and do it. It was like a YouTube video. It didn't mean that the book was going to be any good, but I wanted to do it. There was a process right there for me. And there's so much information at our fingertips now. We're so lucky. I often have people calling me up wanting to pick my brain to find out how I got published, or how to find an agent, or how to work with an editor. And I just say the information is out there, and it's not that hard to find. And that's the beautiful thing about living these days.
Yeah. And then, so did you find it hard? First of all, did you set out when you were writing this book, did you set out to go, right, I am going to write a book and I'm going to get it published? Or did you say, I'm just going to write it and see where it goes? And was it hard to get published?
The first goal was to get the book finished, because I didn't really believe at first that I would ever finish it. I'm a really good starter. I'm not such a great finisher. And a book is a big undertaking. It takes most people a year. It takes some people 10 years to write a book. And I didn't know if I would finish it. And I did it the same year that I had a baby. So I kept it quiet at first. I didn't know if it was something that would ever get finished. And so I didn't want people asking me, how's the book going, if it had just fallen by the wayside. So when it did get finished down the road, I then, true story, opened up my Google browser again and typed how to get published.
I love this.
100% true, because I thought, okay, I've finished it. Well, let's see. And Google had the answers again, and it said, and again, 9 years ago, since then, self-publishing has become a real viable option, where back then it wasn't really. Back in the olden days, it wasn't really so much of an option. And so the links that were coming up on Google were to find a literary agent, which is still a really great way of getting published. And so then Google browser, how to find a literary agent. Honestly, this is how you do it, people. And I found out that you need to send a query letter, which is basically a synopsis of your book, off to literary agents. There's a bunch of them in Australia. There is a lot more in the US. There's some in the UK. I put a list together of the ones that I liked the look of, that had represented authors who I thought wrote in similar styles to me. And I started sending off this query letter, which is just one page about what the book is about. And most of them won't even read any pages of the book. They will just read your synopsis and see if they like the sound of it. And then if they do like the sound of it, they will ask for more pages. Or ask for some pages to read. So that, yes, it's a really difficult process. the vast majority of people that I queried just said they weren't interested or didn't respond at all. And that's a really common situation. I did get one call back from an agent in New York after 3 or 4 months of it being out on submission and a lot of rejections. And she was a new agent who was looking to build her list, and she liked the book, but she thought that it needed some work. And she asked if I'd be open to working on her with some edits, which I was. And we worked on the book for about 9 months, back and forth. She was making suggestions and I was implementing them. And then the end of it, she said, okay, we're going to go out on submission, which means you're going to send it out to editors, see if anyone wants to buy it. And no one wanted to buy it. So I got through that step of finding an agent, which was a really difficult, long process. And then no one wanted to buy the book. And in the meantime, I was writing another book because I thought if this one doesn't sell, I'd now been reading all about novels. I thought I can write a much better novel. And if that one doesn't sell, I'm going to have this one as an insurance policy. And my agent, I then gave her the book once it was finished, the second book, and she read it and she said, I don't think that this book's going to work. So the first book hadn't sold. The second book she didn't think was any good. And then she told me that she'd decided that being an agent wasn't for her. So she was going to...
So that was the triple whammy.
Yes, yeah. So that was the low. In every story, there is an arc and there's, the person goes... And then there's the crushing low. So this was the crushing low of my publishing story.
So before we continue, tell me how you handled the crushing low. Because a lot of people at this point would say, okay, everything's saying get out of here, stop, quit while you're ahead.
Yeah.
So how did you handle it? What went through your head at the time?
Well, yeah, it was a really tough time. And I haven't even thrown in, I was pregnant with my second child. I was working part-time. I had a toddler by this stage. And yeah, it was a really difficult time. And I often are speaking to unpublished writers who really want to get published, and they talk about how, well, they'd love to write, but they are, they have children at home, they're working full-time or part-time, they've got family, they've got people that are relying on them. And that's absolutely really, really difficult to do that. But most of the published writers I know have gone through that, and that is just, if you really love it, if you really love anything and you find that thing that's for you, you keep going in spite of the fact that everything seems like it's against you. And you just have to listen with the interviews that you do and the things that inspirational stories that we see on TED Talks or on successful people speaking, they always have got this crushing low. And I think it's the fact that they kept going in spite of it that is what makes them successful.
So true. It's that resilience and that drive, isn't it, that separates the people who really do succeed to the ones who really want to, but they just don't have that something.
Yeah, I think so. And I think to be successful, failure is unavoidable. I think that even if you don't fail in the beginning, you're going to fail somewhere down the... Failure is unavoidable in life.
Yeah.
I think... But the one upside of this situation was that she said to me, I've decided to leave agenting, but I'm going to give your manuscript, the first one, which still hadn't received any bites from editors. I'm going to give it to the owner of the agency, and if he likes it, he will take you on as a client. If he doesn't like it, you're back to square one. No agent, no contract, got to start a new book. So that was a really dark couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah.
There was a lot of, no, there wasn't. I was going to say there was a lot of alcohol being drunk, but I think I was pregnant. So there probably
you couldn't.
A lot of tea being drunk, which makes it worse. This is the real low. And I then got the call that the agent, Rob Weisbach, who is still my agent and who was the owner of the agency and arguably, a very strong, very successful agent, did like my first book and that he wanted to take me on as a client. So that was the beginning of my upswing.
Yay!
And he ended up selling the first book to a German publisher, and that was published only in German in 2014. So my very first book to be published is in German, and the only 2 words I understand on it are Sally and Hepworth.
Oh my gosh.
My third book, which I then went on to write, The Secrets of Midwives, sold into a 3-book deal with St. Martin's Press in New York, and I've then written the next 2 books. The Family Next Door was the next book which I wrote, which sold into another 3-book deal, and I'm writing the next one. So often they say, the darkest time is right before the dawn.
Yes.
Is that what they say?
Yeah.
So that was true for me. After that was that really low time, but everything kind of turned around from then. And now I am honestly doing everything I dreamed of. I'm writing full time. I don't have another job. I am able to do this and make a living out of it. And I get to spend my days with words and stories and books, which is always what I wanted to do.
Oh, that's so good. And we were having a chat before too about where Sally showed me your office and she said, I haven't got the desk in here yet, but I find I'm loving working at the libraries. And we're having a chat about what a great place to work the libraries for an author.
It's perfect. It's surrounded by books. There's Wi-Fi, there's heating, cafes nearby, and a lot of authors, if you go to your local library, there are a lot of authors lurking around writing their books. I know of at least 3 or 4 who write from their local libraries. And
so do you get a bit of a buddy group happening?
We have a buddy group, yes. And I move from library to library and you see different people there. And there's a really interesting bunch of people. There are a lot of students. There are a lot of people come in just to read the newspaper and they have a chat. There's some amazing people watching that you do. Every day someone comes in and you hear the elderly people having a chat, or the babies. I think it was yesterday when there was an elderly group in there doing computer training and the kids came in for toddler music time, and you could see all of the elderly people look over and they just lit up because all these little ones were coming in and they were singing. And that stuff is just worth its weight in gold for a writer.
It's such a beautiful community hub, bringing so many different sections of the community together when you think about it, isn't it?
That's what it is. It's a hub.
Yeah.
It's so much more than the borrowing the books. There are people, elderly people, students, like teenagers, that middle of the road folk like me, and people do congregate there. It's a lovely place to work.
Now, I know you probably get asked a lot about your ideas and inspiration, but before that, I just want to, if you're watching this, I'm holding up Sally's latest book, The Family Next Door, which I bought today from Dymocks, and I can't wait to read. Yeah, because I love the other one I read. I've read The Mother's Promise. That was fantastic. But I just was thinking, I bought this from Dymocks and I made a decision to buy it there, which was more expensive than your Targets and Kmart's, because I had a feeling, and I want you to verify this, please, if it's true. Does the author, well, it makes sense, the author would get more from, a bigger sale. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Obviously, the higher the cover price, the more the author gets a percentage of the cover price. One thing which is a misunderstanding that is quite common, and a lot of people apologise because they bought the Kindle book and they say, oh, sorry, but in fact I get the same amount for a Kindle book as I do for a full price sale because the percentage is higher. Even though the price is lower, so I make the same. So I don't apologise for buying a Kindle book.
So
authors
good.
like that.
That is really good to know.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well,
okay.
Thank you. And also it's so great to support Dymocks, independent bookstores.
Yeah.
Because that is where it's wonderful to get your Kmart's and your Targets and Big W's. It does keep the price down, which is great for readers who want to buy books. But you don't get the people there who are the book lovers who you can go and say, my niece has got a birthday coming up, she's 12, what should I give her to read? Is the new Geraldine Brooks book out, where can I get it? Those kind of conversations are invaluable, and the people that work at Dymocks and at QBD and at all of these bookstores love books.
They do. And even the smaller ones, what are there in Queensland? I've saw Molly somethings, or Molly Dean, or there's like a few really gorgeous readings. There's a few really gorgeous smaller ones, and I just love the fact that they are. You can see they're so passionate about what they do, and so okay, that's
Support
really
your
good for
local
us to know.
bookstore.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really important. So let's get on to the idea of the themes where you're coming up with. Do you get inspiration? You were talking about the library, but do you get inspiration from things that happen in your life, to friends, to things that you like? How do you get that initial seed of a story?
All of those things. Usually the seed, though, is more of a moment rather than all of those things come in and they fill the pages of the books. A story someone told me, something that happened to me, a conversation that I've had. Those things weave their way into the books and become the themes. But the actual spark from an idea is usually a moment. For example, The Mother's Promise, which you said you read, that came from a news article that I read when I was sitting in bed. Secret truth here, I write from bed as often as I can. I just love sitting in bed with my laptop, and I was sitting there and I was going through the news. I was procrastinating, and there was a story of a woman who was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and she was a single mother without any family, and she needed to find a home for her daughter. And I thought, that's the story that I'm going to write. I knew in that moment, I just connected to that story.
Yeah.
And I knew with other books, The Secrets of Midwives, I was pregnant with my second child. I was reading all about birth and babies and midwifery, and I'd read all about the non-fiction stuff about what to expect when you're expecting the first time. And this time I was into birth and babies, and so I thought, well, I'm going to write about this. I know you should write the book you want to read, and I wanted to read about midwives. Yeah. So that one came that way. With The Family Next Door, it was a little bit different. It really was born out of three things. The first was neighbours. I'm a really nosy neighbour. I really keep a close eye on what's going on in my... I'm
Look out, Sally's neighbours.
I know. I'm Mrs. Mangle. I'm at the front, peering through the blinds. And
she died just a few weeks ago.
Was she still alive?
Yeah,
God,
she was
must
alive.
have had a good innings.
Yeah, we're talking about neighbours, the old-time neighbours.
Nell Mangle.
Sorry, continue, Mrs. Mangle.
Oh, yeah, Mrs. Mangle. Oh, God, rest her soul.
I know.
I'm Mrs. Mangle, and so when I hear about things that happen in communities, like the man in somewhere in America that was found, and he had 3 women living in his house, and he'd kidnapped them all, and they were living upstairs in his house, and they'd been there for 10 years. And I remember Cleveland, they were in Cleveland.
Yeah.
And his neighbour was interviewed the day that this happened, and obviously it was massive. It got worldwide coverage. And I was watching the news right after this came out, and they were interviewing his neighbour, who claimed, and perhaps it was true, that he had no idea, and he lived next door to them for 10 years. And I thought, I would have known. I would have known
for sure.
And so it just got me thinking about what could be going on in the houses around us if we didn't know, and how was that possible? And because it was so foreign to me, the question that I ask is, well, what if something was going on right next door? What if that person who looks normal, which is what this neighbour said, he looked normal, he took out his bins, he seemed like a nice guy. What if those people that live next door to us were hiding something, and what would they be hiding, and what could it be? And so this book became this kind of manifest of that, and not that particular story. I made up other things that they were hiding that seemed plausible to me. And then it just ended up, there were about 5 point of view characters in that book, and all of the stories related to, which is the second thing that inspired me. The first was neighbours. The second was women's health, which comes into every book that I write. When I've written about midwives, Alzheimer's, cancer, social anxiety disorder. This time, as I wrote the stories, they all related to postpartum issues. Postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, and even postpartum psychosis. And I think that part came because I was pregnant again as I wrote this book. Someone asked me recently if I have to be pregnant to write a book, and I said, I hope not.
It does something to... you're going to have to... You've got 3.
Not having any more. So those postpartum issues became the area of women's health, which was explored in this book. And the third part, which informed this book, was my interest in the way that we present ourselves to the world, and through social media, in person, this need to be Pinterest perfect and ready and tell everyone that our lives are perfect, and those 3 things just wove together and became The Family Next Door.
Oh, it's intriguing. I'm going to get stuck into it tonight when I get home. All right, let's move on. And I want to ask you about self-care, because I think that's really important, and I always like to hear what people do to look after themselves. So I know, because I find it's something that a lot of women, and mothers especially, but a lot of women struggle, because we feel like we're doing so much for so many people and we're pulled in so many directions. So self-care, It can be as big as you doing a meditation or a yoga class every day, or as little as you having a cup of tea. What do you do just to give yourself a little bit of time where you can just check in, look after yourself?
There are best practices, and then there's what I actually do.
I want to hear what you actually do, because I hate all the best practices and people saying that they do this and that, because really, I think people can relate to the honesty. I struggle with this all the time.
Yeah, I do too. And I think that sometimes self-care can go the wrong way, where it becomes another thing on your list that makes you feel imperfect. If you feel like you're meant to wake up in the morning and do meditation and then yoga and go for a walk, and you don't do it, you feel like a failure for, this balance becomes something that's unattainable, and you don't always have balance, and that's
it's
okay.
a fallacy anyway.
It's a fallacy.
Yeah.
So that said, I do feel, I do try to do yoga, and that is something that goes like this throughout the year, depending on how busy I am, and it's fallen by the wayside now, but I am feeling better when I do yoga. One thing which never really falls by the wayside is, and this is going to sound really strange, I have 3 children and I work full time and I have got all of these things on, but I am a good sleeper.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and because sleep obviously is, refreshing and important in the same way as eating well and exercising and all of those things. But for me, creatively, it fulfills me and it sustains me. The thing about writing a book is that it's not fast. It takes me a year to write a book, which is probably as fast as most people, anyone I know, it takes them a year at the very least.
Wow.
And so you are forced to slow down, and it's good for the process that it takes that long, because you don't just slam something out. You're constantly thinking about those characters. You're having epiphanies. You're kind of working out what is in your book and how to weave that into a theme. And so when I'm stuck from writing, which happens a lot, I've heard writers say that they lie down. They just find there's something about physically changing the stance of their body that kind of frees up their brain. Some writers will change to a pencil, writing physically, handwriting rather than typing. I find lying down actually going to sleep, and I mean a full-on wake up and you don't know what day it is, 3-hour nap.
Yeah.
Not a 15-minute power nap, which would be so much more convenient if it was, because who has time for a 3-hour nap? And I don't do it all the time, but probably every weekend I'll have a good long nap. And I wake up and I feel like I've just solved whatever problem it was I was working through on my manuscript. I lie there, and when I'm waiting to go to sleep, I think about my characters. I think about what plot problems I'm having. I think about, even if it's not related to work, my children and what I'm worried about with them, or all of those things. You can't escape. As women, we are thinking about the problems that we need to solve all the time, even when we're doing self-care. But I wake up and I feel like I have resolved that. And so I have moved on from my guilt about having these long naps, and now I've just accepted that that is something that I require to function as a human being. And it's really one of my only non-negotiables.
That is so good that you said that, because you're probably aware of it, but there is so much research around about how good sleep is for you. And even just recently there was some research saying if you can't get the right amount of sleep during the week, those naps on weekends, those 3-hour naps, can actually really help with making up some of that. It's not ideal, but if you're sleeping well during the week and you're having those naps, that's amazing.
Yeah.
But it's even saying, well, if you can't have a bit of that sleep on the weekend, and that will help you. But then other studies that show so much about your body, your whole lymphatic system, everything needs to rest.
Yeah.
And so sleep is so important. But then also, and my dad always used to say with this when we were little and we were having problems with stuff, and just go to sleep. Your subconscious will work on it overnight, and you'll wake up and you'll be ready for the exam, or you'll remember stuff. And it's really true.
Yep.
Like, you don't have to solve the problems.
Yep.
You go to sleep and your brain will just work it out while you sleep. It's the best way to work, isn't it?
It's the same with an argument. You've had an argument with your husband and they say don't go to bed angry. I go to bed angry all the time.
So do
but I never wake up angry. Right?
I am so glad you said that.
Yes.
Because this was a couple of weeks ago. I went to bed angry and I thought of that, and I thought, you know what? haven't got time to bloody be talking of this out at 10 o'clock at night. Bugger that.
Good God. And
But
then
you're
you
right.
can't help but raging at night when you're lying in bed going, bastard.
Yeah, exactly.
And why not be angry? It's not like they're going to get hit by a car or something while they sleep. They're pretty safe.
And if you I wake up fine the next day.
Fine.
Move
And then
on.
you have a cuddle and you move on. Sleep's good for everything. It
Oh,
really is.
great tips here. I'm loving
Much better
these.
than yoga. Everyone just go to sleep.
That is so good.
Everyone's got permission to take a nap.
Now, I've got so much I want to talk to you about, but I'm conscious of the time. But just one more little thing that we were talking about before, when we're just looking out for ourselves as well. We were just talking about how busy life is, and I hate that everyone says, "How are you?" Oh, busy, you know, and it's moving on now from being a badge of honor to people actually realizing it's not a badge of honor. And we were saying how, as we're getting older, we're learning to say no to people with more confidence and in a way that isn't rude, but it's coming from a place where you're looking after yourself and putting your family first or whatever. So can you tell me a bit about what you were saying about that? And you've got a great little saying that you've worked out. That's what I can say and feel okay about saying no.
Yeah, because it's so, that comes from everywhere. Once you have got a family, even if you don't have if you have a job, if you have any sort of relationships in your life, you're going to have people asking you for things, and you need to be able to give back where you can. But the thing that I find hardest is when people catch me by surprise and they come up to me in the street and ask me for something, or they'll, even via email, they'll ask me for something, and immediately I become paralyzed and I think I have to say yes to this. It's the Catholic guilt. I think the Catholic guilt's got a lot to answer for.
Yes.
And if I'm caught on the fly, I'll often just say yes, because I can't say no to someone's face. If they're standing there, and my mind will be going a million miles an hour trying to think of an excuse, or I will feel guilty and think, yes, I should do that, where I haven't really given it proper consideration. And I was talking to my friend about it recently, and she said the phrase you need is, "I would love to, but." And I love that because it gives you an opportunity to say something that's true. I would love to. I'm not sure, but I'm not sure I have the time at the moment. I'd love to, but unfortunately, I'm working a certain amount of hours and I'm not going to have time to devote to that. I'd love to, but unfortunately. The other saying, which you said, which I think is great, is I'm not sure, can I get back to you? Because that is great, because it's much easier to go away and think about it and not have to answer in the moment. Because then you might realize, you look at your diary, look at your week and think, no, I can't do that. Or you might think, actually, that week's pretty okay. Maybe I'll put into the pot this week. Because we agree we have to put into the pot. We put into the pot a lot. Yeah. But it's good to be more proactive rather than reactive. Yeah. And when I'm being proactive and saying, okay, children, I'm going to come to one thing for you per term. What is it that you want me to come to? Or to Christian, I'm going to make you dinner once every 2 months, which month would you like? But no, I do. No, that's probably correct figure actually. But then you're getting out in front of it instead of just reacting, which isn't good for anyone. And every time you say yes to someone, you say no to someone else. And I don't want to be saying no to my kids all the time. Yeah. And that's what happens if you say too many yeses. And I think once you start doing that, it does get easier. It's like you feel awful at first. You do. As many women hate letting people down, but when you do it, you feel like that little bit of you has gone, hey, good on you. You've looked after yourself and you've said it in a nice way. You haven't said it in an awful bitchy way. No. And often people will come back to you and say, absolutely no problem. And they understand. Yeah. And they might even learn a lesson on, how to say no to things when you do it. Yeah. Now, I've got 3 quick questions before we finish. Okay. So on the spot here, what is something that makes you have a huge belly laugh? Your sister. Old friends, I think. The ones that have got the deepest secrets and the things that probably would not be funny as adults, but they're hilariously funny because with those people you go back to being your 12-year-old self. Oh, yeah. Old friends make me laugh like nothing else. Nothing like old friends, hey? Yes. And what's something that makes you cry? Anything. I cried the other day when I listened to Smooth FM on the radio.
I love Smooth FM.
Yes, and sometimes just a good old Krista Berg song will really get me welling up. And I'm a real weeper. You probably wouldn't know that about me, but really it doesn't take much. A sad story, a sad song, a sad movie. Something happening to my kids. My son, someone tied his shoelaces together the other day and he fell over and he was fine. But my heart just bled. He thought it was funny, but I welled up with a tear. Yeah, it doesn't take much.
And last one is, what would you tell your teenage self now?
Oh,
it's a good one, isn't it?
that is a good one.
Yeah.
I think
In all your wisdom.
I think that I might say it's going to be okay.
Oh, yes.
Which sounds a little bit, it's going to be okay. And I mean that across all boards. It's everything. It's a tough time to be younger when so much in your life is unresolved and you don't know if you're going to get married. You don't know if you're going to have children. You don't know if you're going to have a job. So much of it is uncertain, and it's a kind of difficult time that not many people acknowledge. And just to say the future is assured, whatever it's going to be. And so just enjoy where you're at. And it's a hard truth to swallow, but I think that would be the advice that I would give myself.
Sally, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been great talking to you, and I could be chatting all night, but it's been lovely, and you've shared some wonderful things, and I'm so excited to get stuck into your book and share the words. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're most welcome.
If you want to hear more, or if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe because it really helps us. Give us a rating on iTunes and subscribe. You'll find us at itunes.com/wildpreciouslives. And you can also check us out on Instagram, same thing, Wild Precious Lives, and the blog, wildpreciouslives.com. So thank you for tuning in. And until I see you next time, I've got one question for you. What is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?